You're 18 and still under our roof. What a failure, my parents said, then kicked me out with nothing. Years later, I met them again in the lawyer's office when my name was the only one in the will. I'm 27 years old. And if you had told me 10 years ago that I'd one day inherit my grandfather's entire estate worth a jaw-dropping $3.5 million, I would have laughed in disbelief. Back then, I didn't even know if I'd make it through the week, let alone to a point in life where I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office with my arranged parents staring at me like vultures circling their prey. The irony of it all is that these are the same parents who cut me off at 18, threw me out with nothing but a backpack, and told me I wasn't their responsibility anymore. Yet here we are with them suddenly reappearing at the will reading as though the past decade hadn't happened. Growing up, my family was complicated. My mom and dad weren't poor by any means. We lived in a nice enough suburban home. My dad worked as a regional manager for a logistics company, and my mom was a part-time teacher who liked to act like she ran the entire neighborhood. But they had one fatal flaw. Appearances were everything. My older sister Claire was the golden child, straight A student cheerleader, the one who never caused them trouble. She could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, was painted as the disappointment. I wasn't rebellious. Not really. I just didn't fit their mold. I liked art more than football books, more than cars, and I had this stubborn streak that meant I questioned things they expected me to just accept. That, to them, was unforgivable. The cracks really started showing when I was a teenager. Anytime money was involved, it became a weapon. Claire got a brand new car for her 17th birthday while I was told to be grateful for hand-me-downs. She got her college tuition fully covered while I was told if I wanted to go, I'd better figure it out myself. And when I tried to push back asking why things weren't equal, I got lectures about being a man and earning my place. My mom would roll her eyes and say things like, you've always been too sensitive. You expect the world to hand you things. My dad would mutter about how I'd never make it without them. I'll never forget one night at dinner when my father leaned across the table, looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you're still under our roof by 18, you're a failure." I laughed then because what else could I do? But inside, I was crushed. When my 18th birthday came, they didn't just kick me out, they staged it like a performance. They sat me down, told me they were cutting me off financially, and said, "It's time for you to learn the value of hard work." They gave me no money, no support, not even a safety net. I walked out of that house with a backpack, 2 changes of clothes, and a part-time job that barely paid enough for groceries. That night, I slept in the backseat of my car. Meanwhile, Claire was posting Instagram photos from her sorority house, smiling with a shiny new MacBook and a credit card from Dad. The only person who didn't abandon me was my grandfather. He was my dad's father, and he'd always been different from the rest of them. Where my parents saw weakness, he saw potential. Where they mocked me for being quiet, he said, "Oliver, that's because you think before you speak." He didn't care that I wasn't the athlete or the golden child. He saw me for who I was. He'd invite me over for weekends, feed me, let me crash on his couch when things got bad. I never told him the full extent of what my parents had done. But he wasn't stupid. He saw the tension. He saw how I flinched when my dad's name came up. And over the years, he became more of a father to me than my actual dad ever was. Fast forward nearly a decade. I'd built a modest life for myself. It wasn't glamorous. I worked long hours, saved where I could, and kept my distance from my family. Claire would occasionally send me smug texts about her vacations or her new house just to remind me I was still beneath her. My parents' silence, unless of course they needed something. Then suddenly, I'd get a call with my mom's syrupy voice. "Oliver, honey, how are you doing?" I knew better than to fall for it. I always kept my answers short. I wasn't going to be their backup plan. And then came the phone call I'd both dreaded and expected. My grandfather had passed away. It gutted me. Even though he'd been sick for a while, I'd convinced myself he'd pull through. Losing him felt like losing the only real family I'd ever had. When the lawyer called and told me I was expected at the will reading, I assumed I'd get maybe a watch or a letter, something sentimental. I didn't think for a second that I'd be the one inheriting everything. When I walked into that oak-paneled office, I froze. Sitting there dressed like they were heading to a gala were my parents and Claire. My mom's smile was wide. My dad's hand rested smugly on his knee. And Claire gave me this once-over like she was measuring how much I was worth now. I wanted to turn around and leave. But I forced myself into a seat. The air felt thick with her fake sweetness. My mom leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry, Oliver. We'll make sure the estate is taken care of properly," my dad added. "Yeah, of course. We'll manage it for you." They were already counting the money in their heads. I could see it in their eyes. They thought I was still that powerless kid they'd kicked to the curb. But then the lawyer cleared his throat, shuffled the papers, and said the words that made my heart pound. Per the wishes of the late Mr. Harold Montgomery, his entire estate, valued at approximately $3.5 million, is hereby left to his grandson, Oliver Montgomery. I swear time stopped. I looked up, and for a split second I thought I saw my grandfather's smirk in my mind, like he'd been planning this moment all along. My parents' smiles froze in place. Claire's jaw actually dropped, and then the lawyer turned the page and said, "There are additional stipulations you'll want to hear." And that's where things took a turn none of us were prepared for. My mother was the first to recover from the shock, though her voice came out too high, too sweet, like she was trying to mask her panic. "Well, of course that makes sense," she said, clapping her hands together lightly. "Oliver was always so close to Dad, but naturally Oliver will need our guidance. He's inexperienced with finances. We'll step in, won't we, dear?" She turned to my father, who nodded as if the whole thing were already decided. My father leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Yes, Harold meant well, I'm sure, but Oliver's not equipped to handle an estate of this size. $3.5 million is a lot for someone with no background. It could ruin him. It's only logical we manage the funds on his behalf. The way he said ruin him made my stomach twist. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as an obstacle between them and a fortune. Claire smirked, tucking her hair behind her ear like she was already picturing herself shopping with the money. Honestly, Oliver, don't take it the wrong way, but you've never been, well, responsible. Remember when you maxed out that tiny credit card freshman year? She laughed under her breath as if that one mistake defined me forever. And Dad's right. A sudden windfall could really mess you up. Let us help. The lawyer cleared his throat again, cutting through their little performance. If I may, Mr. Montgomery specified very clearly that the estate belongs to Oliver alone. No trustees, no oversight, full control. His eyes flicked toward me briefly as if to say, "Your grandfather knew what they'd try to do." That didn't stop my parents. My mom put a hand on my arm, her nails digging just slightly into my sleeve. "Oliver, sweetheart, you know we only want what's best for you. We can guide you through this. Make sure you don't make mistakes. Think of it like a family effort. Grandpa would want us all to benefit." That word benefit hung heavy in the room. Benefit for them, not for me. I stayed quiet, trying to keep my face neutral, but inside I was boiling. All those years of being told I wasn't enough, of being pushed aside for Claire, of sleeping in my car while they laughed over vacation photos, and now they thought they could swoop in and control the one thing my grandfather had left me. It wasn't even about the money in that moment. It was about their arrogance, the assumption that I couldn't possibly handle my own life without their guidance. Claire crossed her legs and leaned forward, her voice soft but dripping with condescension. "Look, Oliver, you've done fine for yourself, I guess. But this is different. You don't want to end up like those lottery winners who go broke in a year, right? I mean, think about it. You're not even a homeowner. You still rent, don't you? You don't have experience investing. What if you blow it all?" She gave a little shrug. "It just makes sense that Dad handles it. He's been managing money his whole career." What she didn't say, but I heard all the same, was that she thought I'd always be the failure, the one lagging behind the one they could keep under their thumbs. The lawyer didn't even look up from his papers this time. Again, Mr. Montgomery's instructions are explicit. No one but Oliver is to control or manage the estate. My father's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. "Of course, we're just concerned, that's all." "You understand, son," he said. Son, like it was some term of endearment, but it felt hollow. This was the same man who had told me I'd never make it without him, who had watched me pack my things on my 18th birthday without offering so much as $20 for food. Now he wanted me to hand over millions out of gratitude. My mom gave a little laugh, tilting her head. "Oliver, you know we always wanted the best for you. Maybe we were tough on you, but look how strong you've become. That was our way of preparing you. Don't hold grudges. Let's move forward as a family." I nearly choked at the hypocrisy. Preparing me by throwing me out, by letting me struggle while they showered Claire with everything. My grandfather had prepared me, not them. He taught me resilience, patience, and the value of quiet strength. Still, I said nothing. I wanted to hear every manipulative word. Let them dig their own holes. The lawyer continued reading through the stipulations, but I barely registered the words. My parents were whispering to each other, already strategizing. Claire tapped on her phone under the table, probably texting her boyfriend about how rich she was about to become. I sat still, but inside I felt something shifting. All those years of being dismissed, all those nights of wondering if I was worth anything, suddenly I had the power, and they hated it. When the lawyer finally finished, my mom stood quickly smoothing her skirt. "Well, thank you, Mr. Thompson. Oliver, we'll discuss the details at home. You'll come over tonight, won't you?" She said it as though it was already arranged, as though I'd automatically fall back into their orbit. My father added, "Yes, we'll get started on a plan. Investments, property management, taxes. Don't worry, we'll take care of everything." And Claire, with that same smug little smirk, leaned in close as we walked out. "You're lucky, Oliver. If it weren't for us, you'd drown in all this. Don't forget who actually knows what they're doing." I clenched my jaw, my fists tied at my sides. Lucky, no. I wasn't lucky. I was chosen. My grandfather had seen through all of them and decided to put everything in my hands. And as much as they wanted to pretend otherwise, they weren't in control anymore. But I didn't say a word, not yet, because I knew deep down that this was just the beginning. I left the law office that afternoon with my head spinning, the copy of my grandfather's will clutched in my hands like a lifeline. My parents had walked out with the kind of brittle smiles that come from swallowing disappointment, but I could feel their eyes burning into my back as I went. I knew them well enough to recognize that this wasn't the end of their schemes. It was only the start. And I wasn't wrong. That very evening around 9 p.m., I got a knock at my apartment door. When I opened it, there stood Claire, looking like she'd just stepped off a runway perfume clouding the air. She gave me that same little smirk and slipped past me without asking. "Cute place," she said, glancing around the small living room with an exaggerated lift of her eyebrows. "But let's be honest, Oliver, this won't do anymore. You'll need something grander. And you know who can help with that? Me." I closed the door slowly, already exhausted. "What do you want, Claire?" She plopped onto my couch like she owned it, crossing one leg over the other. "Simple. I'm here to make sure you don't embarrass yourself with this inheritance. You've been living small for so long you don't even realize what you've got. Think about it. Dad knows investments. Mom knows people. And I..." She twirled a strand of hair around her finger. "I know style. Imagine the three of us helping you. We could turn Grandpa's estate into something bigger, but only if you stop being stubborn." Her words stung, not because they held truth, but because they mirrored every insult my parents had ever thrown at me. Small, stubborn, incompetent. She'd learned the script by heart. "I don't need help," I said firmly. "Grandpa left it to me. Not you, not them, me." Her smile faltered just slightly, but she covered it with a laugh. "Oh, Oliver, you really think that? You think Grandpa didn't expect you to lean on the family? You wouldn't even have met with that lawyer if Mom hadn't told you the time." That's when I realized she wasn't here to help. She was here to test me to see if I'd been. But the real betrayal came a week later. I got a call from the lawyer. His tone clipped. "Oliver, I need to ask, did you authorize any changes to the estate account?" My stomach dropped. "No." "What?" "There have been attempts to access the funds. Someone presented themselves at the bank as your representative. Luckily, the bank flagged it because of the stipulations in the will, but they were very insistent, claiming you had verbally authorized it." I knew immediately who it was. My parents. That night, I drove past their house. It looked exactly as I remembered. 2 cars in the driveway, the porch light glowing warmly, the picture of suburban comfort. I sat there in the dark, hands gripping the wheel, watching the home I'd been exiled from. And for the first time, I didn't feel sadness or longing. I felt cold, calculated, because this wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was theft. They were willing to break the law, to forge, to lie, just to strip me of what my grandfather had trusted me with. And then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife, Claire texted me later that night. "Don't be naive, Oliver. Money belongs in the hands of people who know how to use it. Be smart, or you'll lose it all." I stared at the message for a long time, my heart thudding in my chest. That was the moment something snapped. The betrayal wasn't just their attempt to steal from me, it was the realization that they would never see me as anything other than the weak link, the disposable one. They had cut me off at 18, laughed as I scraped by, and now that I finally had something of my own, they wanted to take it too. I put my phone down and sat in the dark thinking about my grandfather. I remembered his voice, steady and firm, the way he'd look at me and say, "Over, don't let anyone tell you what you're worth. You decide that." For years, I hadn't believed him. But now, with my parents circling like sharks, I finally understood. That night marked the turning point. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me anymore, and And I wasn't just going to protect what was mine, I was going to make them regret ever underestimating me. But I had no idea just how far they'd go next or how ugly the fight was about to become. The days after the bank incident were some of the darkest I'd lived through since the night I was kicked out at 18. At first I thought I could just ignore my parents' schemes, cut them out completely, and move on with my life. But that's not how they worked. They had this way of clawing into every crack, forcing themselves into places they didn't belong until you felt suffocated. I started noticing strange things. One morning I went down to my car and found a deep scratch carved along the side. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, jagged, like someone had taken a key and dragged it from the front bumper to the taillight. Later that week, I got an email from my landlord saying they'd received multiple anonymous complaints about noise from my apartment. I lived alone. I barely played music and I worked late most nights. It was obvious someone was trying to make trouble for me. And then came the whispers. My parents still lived in the same town I'd grown up in, and they had their little circle of friends. The country club set, the church crowd, the neighbors who thrived on gossip. Suddenly, those people were looking at me differently when I ran errands around town. The cashier at the grocery store who used to smile now raised her eyebrows when I paid in cash. The woman at the gas station muttered, "Must be nice living off an old man's money." I knew where it came from. My parents had started painting me as the greedy, undeserving grandson who swooped in and stole the family estate. The worst part wasn't even the slander, it was the silence. The few friends I had in town stopped calling. They'd heard the rumors too, and maybe part of them believed it. I'd worked so hard to scrape together a reputation as someone dependable, someone who could be trusted, and now my parents were undoing it all. I hit a low point one night when I sat alone at my kitchen table staring at the stack of bills in front of me. Not because I couldn't pay them. I had access to funds now, but because I was terrified. Terrified that if I used my grandfather's money too openly, it would feed the narrative my parents were spinning. Terrified that every move I made would be twisted into proof that I wasn't capable of handling what I'd been given. That's when the old doubts crept back in. Maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't strong enough. Maybe I'd drown in this inheritance the way they said I would. For hours I sat there replaying every insult, every dismissal, every memory of being told I was worthless. It was like I was 18 all over again, sleeping in the backseat of my car, wondering if I'd even make it to the next week. But then I opened the drawer of the table, and inside was something I'd nearly forgotten. An envelope my grandfather had given me on my 21st birthday. I'd kept it all these years without ever really looking at it again. Inside was a letter written in his firm, slightly shaky handwriting. Oliver, if you're reading this, I hope you've learned by now that the world doesn't give you anything it tries to take. Don't let them. You are stronger than you know, and one day you'll have to prove it. When that time comes, don't shrink back. Stand tall. They can only take from you if you hand it to them. I read it over and over until the words burned into me. My grandfather had known. He had seen through my parents long before I ever did, and he had trusted me to rise above it. That night, something shifted in me. I was still at rock bottom, lonely, beaten down, overwhelmed. But I started to plan quietly, carefully. I began documenting everything. I kept copies of the bank's report about the attempted account access. I saved Claire's text messages. I wrote down every rumor I heard in town and where it had come from. At work, I started staying late using the company's public computers to research estate law, trust funds, and property management. If they wanted to treat me like I was incapable, I was going to make sure I became the most capable person in the room. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I smiled when people sneered, stayed calm when my parents sent their little barbs, and acted like I was backing down. All the while, I was building something quietly beneath the surface. It was lonely, painful. Every day felt like walking a tight trope over an endless drop. But there was a strange power in the silence. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. And I had the distinct, unshakable feeling that my grandfather would have been proud. I didn't know when or how, but I swore to myself that the day would come when the balance shifted, when I'd stop being the target and start being the one holding the strings. I just didn't realize how quickly that opportunity would arrive, or how brutally my parents would try to force my hand. The shift didn't happen overnight, but once it began, it felt unstoppable, like a tide finally turning in my favor after years of being dragged under. I kept my head down, worked long hours, and poured myself into learning everything I could about handling wealth responsibly. It wasn't about the money itself, not really. It was about proving to myself that I wasn't the helpless child my parents had always claimed I was. The first real turning point came when I hired a financial advisor. Not someone flashy or connected to my parents' world, but a quiet, meticulous man named Richard who had been recommended through a coworker. He wasn't impressed by the size of the estate. And he didn't treat me like a child. He sat across from me with a yellow legal pad, asked careful questions, and listened to my answers without judgment. By the end of our first meeting, he handed me a simple plan. Investments, diversified taxes, covered long-term security built in. "You're more than capable," he told me as we shook hands. "You just needed someone to confirm it." Those words lit something inside me. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just holding on to my grandfather's gift out of fear. I was building on it. I used part of the estate to buy a modest home in a quieter part of town. Nothing ostentatious, nothing my parents could sneer at as showing off, but it was mine. Walking through those empty rooms the first night, I stood in the middle of the living room and just let the silence wash over me. No one could throw me out here. No one could tell me I didn't belong. The keys in my pocket were proof that I'd finally carved out something real. At work, too, things started to change. I'd been just another name on the payroll. But now, with the weight of my grandfather's letter in the back of my mind, I started pushing harder. I volunteered for projects, stayed late, delivered more than people expected. Slowly, people began to notice. A promotion came, small but significant. My boss told me, "You've got leadership in you, Oliver. You just need to believe it yourself." I didn't broadcast any of this. I knew better than to let my parents catch wind of how well things were going. But inevitably, word trickled out. Small-town gossip had a way of circling back. And soon enough, I started hearing whispers that only fueled me more. "He bought a house. He's got a new job title. Maybe Harold knew what he was doing after all." The rumors my parents had spread were starting to crack, replaced by something else. Respect, even if grudging. And that respect terrified my parents more than anything. One evening, Claire showed up at my new house uninvited. I didn't let her pass the porch. She stood there in heels, arms folded, her expression caught between disbelief and irritation. "Nice place," she said flatly. "Did you decorate it yourself? Or did you finally get someone to hold your hand?" I didn't bite. I just leaned against the doorframe and said, "I'm doing fine, Claire." "Better than fine." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't get cocky, Oliver. You think one house and a job promotion means you've won? Dad's already looking into ways too." She stopped herself, biting her lip, but I caught it. Dad's already looking into ways to what? Regain control, undermine me. It didn't matter. I knew then that they hadn't given up. And that's when I realized my rise wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about positioning. Every step forward was leverage. Every success was a weapon they couldn't take from me. I began aligning myself with people outside of my family's reach. I joined a local charity board in my grandfather's name, honoring the work he'd quietly done for years. I worked with people who respected my grandfather, who remembered his integrity and generosity. With each handshake and each connection, I was weaving a net of support around myself, one my parents couldn't break with gossip alone. Inside, I was still cautious, still carrying the scars of those early years. But for the first time, I felt a quiet confidence building. My parents had expected me to stumble, to drown in responsibility. Instead, I was learning to swim in deeper waters than they ever imagined. Still, I kept my preparations hidden. I knew the storm wasn't over. If anything, it was gathering. And when it broke, I wanted to be ready because I could feel it coming. My parents weren't the type to accept defeat quietly. They tried manipulation. They tried theft. They tried slander. None of it had worked. The next move I knew would be bigger, more desperate. And when it came, I had to be in a position not just to defend myself, but to strike back. The setup came almost by accident. Though in hindsight, it felt like my grandfather's hand guiding me even years after his passing. I'd been attending more of those charity board meetings, the ones I joined in his honor. And it was at one of these gatherings that I met a man named Daniel Grant. He was in his late 50s, a retired attorney with sharp eyes and the kind of calm presence that made you lean in when he spoke. He'd known my grandfather personally. Apparently, they played chess together every Thursday night for nearly a decade. When he found out who I was, his expression softened. "Harold was a rare man," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I hope you know how proud he was of you." Something about the way he said it felt different, almost conspiratorial. Over coffee later that week, he leaned across the table and lowered his voice. "You should be careful, your grandfather." He anticipated there might be trouble after he passed. He put certain protections in place. I froze. Protections. What kind of protections? Daniel smiled faintly. "That's something we can talk about more formally. But let's just say Harold wasn't blind to your parents' nature. He made sure the estate would be safeguarded in ways they wouldn't expect. If they overstep, it won't just be morally wrong, it'll be legally disastrous for them. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just playing defense, I had ammunition. Over the next few weeks, Daniel helped me understand exactly what my grandfather had done. The estate wasn't just a lump sum of money, it was structured carefully. There were deeds shares in a small portfolio of properties and even a trust earmarked specifically for philanthropic projects in my name. More importantly, there were clauses, ironclad stipulations, that explicitly disinherited my parents if they attempted to interfere or present themselves as representatives. My grandfather had written it all down, signed and notarized, as though he knew they would try to take what wasn't theirs. As Daniel laid it all out piece by piece, I felt something shift inside me. All those years I thought I was alone, powerless, scrambling to survive. It turned out my grandfather had been planning for this exact moment. He had seen the storm brewing, and he had left me not only the resources to withstand it, but the leverage to fight back. Meanwhile, my parents grew bolder. I started getting letters in the mail, formal-looking envelopes with their names typed neatly at the bottom. Proposals for how I should allocate the inheritance. One suggested putting Claire on the payroll as a family liaison. Another recommended selling off the estate properties to avoid management headaches, and of course funneling the proceeds into trusted family accounts. I didn't respond to any of them, but I kept each letter filed neatly in a folder Daniel advised me to maintain. Paper trails are powerful, he told me. Every word they put in writing is another rope they're tying around their own throats. At the same time, I was climbing higher in my own right. Work recognized me again this time, with a significant promotion that came with more authority and a seat at the table during strategy meetings. Suddenly, people who had once overlooked me were asking for my opinion, nodding when I spoke. It wasn't about the money anymore, it was about respect. Real respect earned through persistence and competence, and with respect came allies. The more people saw me stepping into my own, the more they pushed back quietly against the rumors my parents had seeded. At community events, I overheard comments like, "Oliver really turned out well, and you can tell Harold raised him right." Every little remark chipped away at the false image my parents had tried to build. The best part, they didn't know. They had no idea that while they were scheming behind closed doors, I was gathering allies' documents and quiet influence. They thought I was still that boy they'd tossed out with nothing but a backpack. They thought I'd cave hand over the reins and thank them for it. But I wasn't that boy anymore. I was a man with power, power they couldn't see coming. And then came the moment that tied everything together. One evening, Daniel handed me a small leather-bound notebook worn at the edges. "Your grandfather asked me to hold on to this until I felt you were ready," he said. Inside were pages of my grandfather's handwriting notes, reflections, and at the back a detailed outline of how to counter every move he predicted my parents might make. He hadn't just left me money, he had left me a playbook. As I closed the notebook, my hands trembling, I realized something with bone-deep certainty. The time for simply surviving was over. I wasn't just going to defend what was mine, I was going to set the stage so that when my parents inevitably made their next move, I'd be ready to crush it completely. They wanted to play games with me. They had no idea I was already holding the winning hand. The breaking point came faster than I expected. My parents had been circling for months, sending letters hinting through neighbors and making not-so-subtle remarks whenever we crossed paths in town. But when they finally made their move, they went big. Too big. One crisp autumn morning, I got a call from Daniel. His voice was calm, but there was a sharpness to it I hadn't heard before. "Oliver, your parents filed a petition with the court this morning. They're claiming you're unfit to manage the estate and are requesting guardianship of the assets." Guardianship. They were actually trying to have me declared incompetent at 27 years old. After everything I'd built for myself, I almost laughed when he told me. The absurdity of it nearly overwhelming. But then the sting hit because this wasn't just another attempt to manipulate me behind closed doors. This was public. This was them dragging my name through the mud, trying to brand me as incapable in front of the entire community. And that was their mistake. Daniel and I had been preparing for months, quietly collecting every scrap of evidence of their interference, the attempted bank access, the manipulative letters, the rumors they'd spread, the wool stipulations my grandfather had laid out with surgical precision. Piece by piece, we had built a case so airtight it practically glowed. The court date arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. I walked into that courtroom in a simple suit, no entourage, no theatrics. My parents were already seated flanking Claire like loyal soldiers. They looked smug, confident, as though the outcome was already sealed. My mother even had the nerve to smile at me, her expression syrupy sweet, like she was forgiving me for forcing this spectacle. But when the judge called us to order, and my parents' attorney began his opening statement, the crack showed immediately. He painted me as irresponsible, emotionally unstable someone prone to financial recklessness. He cited my lack of experience and my modest background. Claire nodded dramatically at each point, playing her role to perfection. And then, it was our turn. Daniel rose slowly, his presence commanding, without needing to raise his voice. Your Honor, what we have here is not a question of competence, but of greed. He began laying out the documents one after another. The forged attempt at the bank, the letters proposing that I hand over control, the text messages dripping with condescension. The stipulations in the will that explicitly disinherited my parents if they so much as attempted to interfere. The courtroom grew quieter with each piece of evidence. My parents shifted uncomfortably, their smugness slipping. Claire's jaw tightened, her arms folding across her chest. And then came the final blow. Daniel held up the leather-bound notebook my grandfather had left me. Mr. Montgomery anticipated this very situation. In his own handwriting, he described his concerns about his son and daughter-in-law's history of manipulation. He wrote, and I quote, "If they attempt to take what is not theirs, it will be proof enough of why I chose Oliver." The words echoed in the courtroom like a gavel strike. I saw my mother's face pale, my father's fists clench, Claire's eyes dart to the floor. When the judge finally spoke, her tone was crisp and final. The petition is denied. The estate will remain solely in Oliver Montgomery's control. Furthermore, this court cautions the petitioners against any further attempts to undermine the explicit wishes of the deceased. This matter is closed. It was over in less than an hour, but the fallout was instant. My parents' attempt to seize control had not only failed, it had publicly exposed them for exactly what they were: manipulative, greedy, desperate. As we left the courtroom, my mother tried one last time. She reached out, her voice trembling with false warmth. Oliver, sweetheart, we only did this for you. You don't understand how much pressure this is. Let us. I stopped and looked at her, calming a way I hadn't been my entire life. No, I said simply. You did it for yourselves. Grandpa knew it, and now everyone else does too. Her hand froze in the air before dropping to her side. My father muttered something under his breath, but he couldn't even meet my eyes. Claire stormed ahead, her heels clicking like gunshots against the marble floor. I walked out of that courthouse with the weight of years lifted from my shoulders. Not only had I defended my grandfather's trust, but I'd done it with a calm they never expected from me. They had underestimated me every step of the way, and in the end, their own arrogance had undone them. But this was only the beginning of their reckoning. Because while the courtroom had settled the legal battle, the real fallout, the social, the personal, the irreversible, was still waiting just around the corner. The weeks after the court hearing were like watching dominoes fall one after another in slow motion. My parents had walked into that courtroom believing they'd win, believing they could bend the world the same way they'd bent me when I was young. But the judge's ruling had done more than deny their petition. It had stripped away the illusion they'd built for decades, and once the mask slipped, the whole town began to see them differently. It started small. My mom's circle of friends at the country club, the ones she'd spent years gossiping with, began to distance themselves. Where once she'd been the center of attention, now conversation stopped when she walked into the room. One woman even told me quietly, "We had no idea how badly they treated you, Oliver." I'm sorry. My mom tried to keep up appearances, but the icy smiles and hushed whispers told me her reputation was collapsing. My father fared no better. His company had heard about the hearing. Small towns have a way of carrying stories into every corner, and suddenly his financial expertise wasn't such an asset anymore. Clients grew weary, meetings were canceled, and eventually word spread that he'd been asked to take an early retirement. For a man whose identity was tied entirely to his career, the humiliation was devastating. And Claire, oh Claire, her fall was the sharpest of all. She had built her social status on the back of being the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one who mocked me while being showered with gifts. But after the hearing, people saw her differently. At parties, she was no longer the center of attention, just the girl who had tried to steal from her own brother and failed. Her boyfriend left her not long after, and I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved back in with my parents. The three of them under one roof again, feeding off each other's bitterness like a slow poison. Meanwhile, my own life expanded in ways I hadn't imagined. The estate wasn't just money, it was opportunity. I invested in myself in projects my grandfather would have been proud of. The charity board grew into something larger, and I found myself stepping into leadership roles where my voice mattered. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the outsider. I wasn't the disappointment. I was someone people respected. But the most powerful moment came one evening when I drove past my parents' house, the same house I'd been thrown out of at 18 with nothing but a backpack. The porch light was on, but the lawn was unkempt, the shutters in need of paint. The house looked tired, worn down, almost like the people inside it. I parked across the street for a while watching. Memories washed over me. The night of my exile, the years of mockery, the endless comparisons to Claire. For so long, this place had represented my failure, my shame. But now looking at it, I felt nothing but clarity. They hadn't destroyed me. They had forged me. Every insult, every dismissal, every cruel word had built the resolve I carried now. And then I realized the revenge was complete. Not because I had humiliated them in court, not because they'd lost their standing, but because I no longer needed their approval. Their power over me was gone entirely. I rolled down my window, letting the cool night air in, and whispered to myself words I'd never dared say before. Grandpa was right. I decide what I'm worth. With that, I put the car in gear and drove away, leaving the house and everything it represented behind me. They had tried to cut me out of their lives. In the end, I had cut them out of mine.